All right. Good morning. Thank you, everybody. Apologies for technical difficulties. Sometimes that tends to happen. But very happy, privileged, honored to have Nate Andres here with us today to present on Beyond the Degree, using authenticity and resilience to build an interesting career. And I will say, just as a little bit of background, I've known Nate since I was in junior high. So he's um, 3 years ahead of me. So good friends with my sister. So I knew him via that. Overlapped a year in high school. Known his family. He's known my family. But
Yeah.
most recently, really gained a lot of insight into his really astounding, I would say, amazing, inspiring career trajectory. And when I asked Nate to do this, he spoke to me a little bit about what he's been up to over the last, what we'd have to go back 30 years, right? Or so, 20 plus years. And really, really amazing. And so I think when I asked him this, I heard a little bit about his story, his recent book that I will share with you, and I'm sure he will as well, Your Real Life. And so I saw some information about his book, Amazon bestseller, and thought he's a person to have come and talk to us, because his background is international, is global, and really, as I say, is inspiring. So I'm going to stop with the introduction there, Nate, but let you go ahead since we're a little bit behind on time, and welcome today. And thank you for presenting for us this morning.
Well, thank you. Funny enough, I always called Dan Danny when Danny was a little guy back in the day. But he is actually Dr. Daniel Bauer, professor. I think that's pretty extraordinary as well. Thanks for that kind introduction, Dr. Bauer. I'm thrilled to be with all of you. And I thought it would be a really interesting way to talk about how do you make the jump, right? And many of you are in intersectional international studies. Looking at a variety of things. And I kind of want to just tell, and Dan asked me to do this, to kind of just tell a story about how you can take your life and your career around the world and do really interesting things. So I'll try to pick up the pace so there's time at the end of the 40 minutes or so we can have a discussion. I like to have a little bit more interaction generally, but we'll try to save that to the end. But if you've got a burning question, or something that you just want to connect with, then certainly raise your hand or put it into the chat. We'll figure out how to do that later. But pleasure to be with you. Here's the riddle that I'd like you all to consider. How are all these things connected? What do you think they might be connected? You see some sports, you see some brands, you see a shirtless dude in Japan, like Happy Meal toys. I will tell you that because we're in a small group and we don't have time to kind of interact, take guesses, the glue is me, is my story. You think, well, how in the world does this guy, go from the Midwest, Chicagoland, where I grew up with Dr. Bauer, to go on and do all these really strange and interesting kinds of things? I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. So I'm Nate. I am a graduate of Marquette University, which is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science and a minor in education and Asian studies. I thought that I was going to be working for the United States Foreign Service and become a diplomat. That was always my goal. And I, found out very quickly that there's a great big wide world out there. And as you can see, my actual job today is human resources executive, far apart, far away from being a diplomat in some respects. But, Dan said, I wrote a book. I did. That's kind of my side hustle. I love writing, and I finally put all my stories into one place. And my passion really is about coaching the future generation. And so my point here is that you might start where all of you are starting, right? Trying to finish your degrees, getting a thing in the thing that you think you're going to use in the world. But what I'm here to tell you is that that's a great entry point, and you should keep going and continue to consider the really interesting things that can pop up in your life. That's the key to getting started. but where you start might be completely different from where you end up. And I can tell you, I raised my hand. I absolutely ended up in a very different place than where I thought I started. So here's kind of how it happened. And I'm going to try to reveal a few secrets so that you can take away these thoughts and ideas and apply them to your life. Again, as I talk about authenticity and resilience, these will naturally kind of come up through the conversation. And it is not only about what you're doing right now and finishing your degrees at Southern Indiana, but also about the things that you will experience as you kind of get out into the workforce, finding a job, creating a career, creating a life for yourselves. Secret number one is what I call, and I talk about this in my book a little bit, is taking an open-armed approach, right? When you take an open-armed approach to the things in your life, particularly your education or the experiences that you're trying to gain, when you open your arms wide, really interesting things will come your way, I promise. And it's absolutely okay if you want to keep a narrow path and a more specific path. But I will say that there's no right or wrong way. In my experience, when you take an open arm approach, you can end up seeing and traveling and being someone of the world, in the world, doing great work. And that's my secret number one. And I'm going to share a little bit about how that happened for me. So, Dan and I were talking a little bit about, how did I start? Well, after I graduated with an undergraduate degree, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I want to go to Japan. I wanted to live and work abroad for many, many years, and I never did. And so I found a really great program. I studied a little bit of Japanese in university, so I had a little bit of a language and a little bit of an introduction, but I decided to go and teach English and do international relations work with a small government that I was on a program after graduate, and they hooked me up with a small town in northern Japan, and then I started doing connection and sister city work, international relations work on a really general and kind of easy basis between this small town in Japan and a very small town in Ohio, which was where I was born and where I'm from. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I grew up in the Midwest. I went to high school with Dan in Chicago. How does the Midwest guy just get to Japan? Well, this is how I made my way. I ultimately stayed in Japan for 5 years the first time. And as I evolved, I opened my arms to welcome really interesting work, and ultimately worked for a research school in the city of Sendai doing research for the Ministry of Education. I never knew how to do government related research, and I considered myself a quick study and an adventurer and a curious person. And I did that for a year. We were very successful, and that led to me working in a small mom and pop kind of import export business. We were importing fashion from all over the world, all over Asia Pacific into Japan, then to sell to wholesalers. I didn't know anything about trade or import or export. I really didn't know how to read a balance sheet. I have a degree in political science, not business. But ultimately, I started to think, how can I do these really interesting things and keep adding what I call color to my palette? Every place I go, I try to squeeze out a little bit of paint so I can learn something and add that to the palette of color that I already have as I paint my masterpiece of a career. So Japan round one was really exciting, but ultimately I moved back to America in 2000, and by coincidence, I happened to connect into a job in New York City where my aunt and uncle were living. And they said to me, what were you doing in Japan? I said, well, I was exporting clothing. They said, well, we know a fashion designer named Nanette Lepore. She's doing runway shows, and I think she's just done a thing with Japan. You should talk to her. So open-armed approach. I'm like, I don't know anything about making dresses or fashion, but my second week was like a combination of Project Runway and The Apprentice. I was behind the scenes sending models down that runway for Nanette Lepore, and 3 weeks later, I was on a plane back to Japan to start the discussions on how she could expand and license her business from the United States into Japan. Completely out of my wheelhouse, but again, quick study, opened arm, really interesting. And in a year, we opened and launched her brand in Japan, and we did about $6 million from that launch. So amazing outcome from creating and using the skills. And this is another part of the technique is when you open your arms, you use the paint that is on your palette so that you can begin to bridge and use those skill sets to do other things. Well, to tell you the truth, in 2001, I lived through 9/11. I am a survivor of that day. It is a really difficult day for me to talk about. I talk about it in the book, but I will tell you that after 9/11, living in New York City, I wanted to change. And I read in the New York Times a really interesting uh, job ad. That's when they were still in newspapers. Okay. Job ads still matter, by the way, across the platforms that exist. But I saw an advertisement. I never forget it. It said, "Hey, sports fans, large international sports organization seeking Japanese bilingual for broadcasting. Inquire." I don't know anything about broadcasting. And I was secretly hoping it was the NBA instead of MLB, but it turned out to be Major League Baseball. And I ended up landing in baseball. And actually, it was not the broadcasting job. It was the power of a really great recruiter in baseball who said, "Nathan, you've done all these really interesting things in Japan and in fashion and bridge building with Japan and US. You're going to run circles around that broadcasting department. You should belong in human resources. Have you ever thought about that?" And at the time, I was like, wait a minute, like, huh? Like human resources? What's that? I don't know anything about human resources, but yeah, I want to work here. This is Major League Baseball. I've got to do this. And ultimately, I took that job. It was in HR and launched my HR career. And I had a great boss. So here's a few tips. When you go out there and you're looking for work, interview the boss because that's the person who can make or break your career. That's the person who will give you really great projects. That's the person who's going to help you learn along the way and add the color and who will be providing the new paint for you to squeeze out on that palette. I had an amazing mentor. He sent me back to school for my first master's degree in HR management at NYU, which I did. Another tip, if you have to go and reinvent your skills, do it. There's no right or wrong. And I know that sounds kind of funny, as you're trying to get through the first degree. Remember, this was 6 or 7, 8 years later. There's no timeline. So you can do how you do you on your timeline. For me, I went back to school. It was perfect. And that's what really accelerated my career. And I ultimately got promoted to go work for the Los Angeles Angels. I worked in LA, and suddenly I realized that if you're going to stay in baseball, you have to wait for someone to die or get fired or retire. And no one in baseball was going to do that. So I decided to take a new opportunity with Abercrombie and Fitch. And Abercrombie helped build my Asia career. In fact, they sent me back to Japan. Here's another tip. When you start to see the things that are on your palette, right? And I said, wouldn't it be great if I could put Japan, my one passion where I spent all this time, and all my language skills and culture skills on the same plate as HR? Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. Be careful what you wish for. I ultimately was sent back to Japan to open the business of A&F in Tokyo. So I got to go back and live in Japan as an expatriate, which is kind of an accelerated business package for leaders to kind of go and live abroad on the company dime. I lived in a great place, and we started to build the business of A&F while it was hot. Now, I know it's a controversial brand, etc. It was controversial then too, but we expanded that business. And from Tokyo, we went to Seoul, to Hong Kong, to Melbourne, to Sydney, and all around Singapore. Ultimately, we expanded that business throughout Asia and helped contribute to the growth plan. Now, again, I didn't know anything about international business. What do I know? I got a degree in political science, and at this point in time, had a master's in HR management. I'm just an HR guy, is what I thought. But in fact, if you open your arms wide, really interesting opportunities will come to you. And this was such an example. Ultimately, going back to Japan was fantastic. But I got to move to Hong Kong with Abercrombie because we were expanding into China. And that was one of the last things I got to do with them before I moved on. Now, where does Happy Meals come in? Well, I also happen to think that after a few years in retail and growing businesses in Asia Pacific, and living in Japan and then moving to Hong Kong, I was kind of ready for a little bit of a palate cleanser, so to speak. I needed to add some really different color to my career. And so I decided that I wanted to stay in HR. I'm always going to stay in HR. I just love the business of people. But if I stayed in Hong Kong, I might be able to change industry and learn something new. And so I took a break from retail and ultimately worked for the world's largest toy manufacturer that you never heard of, but they make Happy Meal toys. We made about 8 billion to 12 billion pieces of Happy Meal toys. And of course, if you've ever known the Happy Meal toys and known the Minions, well, we made them. Somebody has to make them. And what an interesting opportunity that was, because in that space, I got to work and learn about how to do global supply chain, how to do global sourcing, how to do logistics, how to also draw on my import-export background. So really interesting things that, I never thought I would be doing. And I went from retail people, salespeople and store control and these types of career paths in retail to then talking about engineering and toy development engineering and quality control engineering. The specifications around making children's toys is really, really important because you don't want to hurt anyone when you make such kind of products and put those out into the world. But amazing opportunity to learn sourcing, logistics, and supply chain. I love that role. In fact, I love that role so much that I wanted to stay. But what happens is if you have your arms wide open, interesting things come. And I've got a knock on the door from Lululemon who said, we're expanding into China and we're taking back Japan and we're trying to build our business in Korea. Would you come back and work for us? And of course, China was a really interesting opportunity to build Lululemon and put Lululemon into China, where we were able to do yoga events on the Great Wall or do things at Tiananmen Square in the center of Beijing and do some really amazing things where we were also expanding the business. So, I didn't ever expect to go back to retail, but I went back and stayed in Hong Kong and worked again the entire region for Asia Pacific. So I led the people business for the entire expanse of Asia where Lululemon expanded. And that was, again, Korea and China and Japan and Singapore and Hong Kong and Macau and all these beautiful places around Asia. Ultimately, in 2019, you might have heard that the Hong Kong protests and some of the turmoil was happening. And at the time, I decided that it was maybe time to leave the Hong Kong landscape. I'd spent 8 years there. I became a permanent resident of Hong Kong. I met my partner there and we built a little bit of a family and we decided we would move to Singapore. And I worked for the Body Shop. And ultimately, what's important here is to make sure that you stay true to your values and ensuring that the things that are really important to you. And what was important to me was to be related to a purpose-driven business. I'm a very purpose-driven, intentional person. And my values are still about authenticity and curiosity and sustainability and making sure that we take care of the planet, looking at a triple bottom line. Most companies look at one bottom line as they chase the top line for making money. They only look at how do they save costs. But a triple bottom line really considers how you look at people, how you look at the planet, and how you look at profit. And that was really important to me as I made my next move. And again, open-armed. I didn't know anything about living in Singapore, and I certainly didn't know anything about working in the beauty business. But beauty is FMCG, right? Fast-moving consumer goods or consumer packaged goods. Again, I didn't know what I was thinking in terms of my experience to work in that space, but I certainly knew that I could learn a lot because the Body Shop also had franchisee partners across 16 additional markets, and they also had a direct selling business in Australia, which was also very, very unique, in addition to their e-commerce and traditional vertical retail. So I knew a lot going in, but I also was able to learn a lot coming out. And that's part of the point, is every time you open those arms wide open, interesting things will come, but make sure you do something with those interesting things. Because when you start to put them together, they can really articulate how you move up and how you continue to grow. I'll give you a great example. I was able to become the chief people officer for Asia Pacific for the Body Shop because I had sourcing and supply chain experiences in the Happy Meal business. Because I applied those in working with Lululemon as we were expanding, I serviced both the sourcing and logistics office as well as the retail. So when I came to the Body Shop, again, pulling all of my experiences together, language, mergers, sourcing, retail, it all kind of came together in order to then drive experiences. And of course, the Body Shop is a very proudly British company. And so I made many trips to our headquarters in London and reconnected with colleagues and workmates there. One of the best things about, working internationally and going global in these ways, and you can see it can happen, anything can happen, okay? It can happen and anything is possible. It can be really, really a tremendous opportunity to see the world and to experience the world in these many, many kind of different ways. And it goes beyond, the campus at University of Southern Indiana. It goes beyond Marquette or beyond Ohio. Here's secret number 2. Shit happens, okay? I stepped in a lot of shit along the way, and I learned a lot. But listen, Einstein said that if learning was easy, we'd all be geniuses, right? The point here is that learning is hard. And as you learn, it's important to then start to embrace those goals, those purpose, those authentic values that are important to you, and learn how to step out of the shit. Okay, and that's where resiliency comes from. And you can apply these principles straight away and where you are right now, finishing off your degrees at school. There's still, finals to come. There's still next term to finish off. There's still all these preparations and internships and things that you want to try to line up to get a job as you finish your degrees. There's going to be some shit. So a mindset that I always embrace is important to the open-armed mindset is allowing shit to happen. But when you just F it, what happens here? The point that I want to try to make is when you put an F, just F it in shit, you get something completely different. You get shift. Now, this is where resiliency comes from, okay? And this is a big part of where my book comes from. And you can apply these immediately. But I applied them in my career internationally all the time, which is why I had to write the book. Because when you use and embrace reality, energy, authenticity, and love, which is what I call the real model, and you coach yourself through the shit, you can bounce beyond and you can then embrace that open arm technique, and really interesting things can start to happen. So shit happens, but so does shift. Okay, and that's secret number 2. Secret number 3 is the real model. And I want to take you through that very quickly, because when you start thinking about resilience, and many of you are already very resilient by the fact that you are in your studies this far, you've had to endure a lot. You've had to already go through a lot of adversity, right? The secret here is using the real model to build resiliency, to take back control from the hard stuff that happens. When you do that and you move from acknowledgement to acceptance of hardship, and I'll show you this in a minute, you can really then start to fly. But it takes energy. You've got to focus your energy and understand where your well-being batteries are going to be. And you'd probably just recharged a little bit over Thanksgiving break, but there's another expenditure coming, right? You have to think about how you manage energy. And authenticity, as I said before, is really about purpose. It's about your values and seeing those and using those as they show up. And last is always about love. I tell my leaders, I tell my teams, I tell people that I talk to, I'm going to tell Dr. Bauer here, I would guess he already does lead with love. When you lead your life with love and you consider how you want to live your life, the outcomes are always positive. And they're always going to yield a sense of joy. And that joy byproduct is actually an overall sense of well-being. Let me get a little bit deeper. As I mentioned before, when you look at facing reality and taking back control in your career or as a student, right? Oh, shit, man, I got another test. Or I failed. Or I got a lower mark on the score on the test that I thought. Well, you have to face reality. Taking resilience and building resilience is about taking that control back and moving from acknowledgement, as I said, to acceptance. and seeing. This is where learning comes from. This is where growth and career trajectory comes from. If you don't learn and don't see the opportunity, which is where I see adversity and opportunity collide, if you're not seeing those opportunities to learn, you're going to stay stuck in the bottom of that curve. But if you see the opportunity and you start to breathe energy and put a plan behind it, you're gonna make it through. And that is taking back control, but it's also using the learning. There's two components to resiliency: taking back the control and learning. Right? Okay. I'm going to just slide my camera over this way. So if we move on, energy, as I said, is equally compelling and important. Okay. If any of you have ever been to the red zone, you know what I'm talking about? You know, we would never look at your phone right now. You know, is your phone fully charged? I bet it is, or I bet you it's half. If you're in the red zone, you panic, right? There's a whole FOMO culture out there of being in the red zone. You cannot allow, and I never allowed, and I did once and I burned out professionally. You cannot allow yourselves to get to that red zone, because if you're not caring for yourself, you know, you'd never let your batteries run down, but so many of us do. If you do, you're going to have a harder time being resilient and driving that career forward and driving through the rest of this semester, for example, right? So managing your energy is really, really important. Okay. And first is understanding where your energy actually comes from, and how to recover your energy, but also to focus your energy. I tell people you have 4 well-being batteries to build resilience in your career. And as you grow, and if you want to go all over the world, you've got to know how to manage your energy. And you know what? How many of you have heard the phrase, you know, you can't fake, you just fake it till you make it. You know, you can't just fake it till you make it. Because your body and your brain know better. The experiences that you already have in your life are deeply embedded in your neurotransmitters and in the neurology and the nerves, and the somatic experiences that your body holds. So you cannot fake it till you make it. You actually, instead, I recommend is really building an understanding of, you know, where you want to be and how you want to be, so you show up. And knowing yourself, when you know yourself and you know your values and you know what your mission is and you know what your goals are, or the things that are going to help you achieve your mission, that's when, you know, you rely on those inner things. But a lot of crazy crap can show up, right? Imposter syndrome, I had it. Self-doubt, definitely I had it. I didn't know a lot of the things I was doing when I was learning how to do them. And certainly I suffered from a really loud inner critic, that little devil on my shoulder saying, you're not good enough. You don't know how to do this. They don't like your work. But learning how to take these voices and muffle and silence your inner critic enables you to start to love yourself. And I talk about this trifecta of self-love. Self-love's out there now in the world. We're all talking about it. What do I mean by it? I mean 3 things. One is self-care. It's really taking care of your body. That's your health. That's your nutrition. That is your sleep. That's your hydration. That's your exercise. Okay. But it's also about self-compassion, being kind to yourself, you know, when you fail, because when you fail, it hurts. But if you're not getting to the failure and seeing the opportunity, you're going to stay stuck in that. And so self-compassion enables us to move and see opportunity and to continue to move and take that control back. And last is really about what I call advocacy, self-advocacy. You have to fight for yourself, right? And in self-love, that third part of self-advocacy is saying, what do you need? What do I need? What do I need for myself? And say it might sound like, hey, professor, I need another day. Or, hey, professor, can I get an extension? Or, hey, boss, I need to take care of my family today. Self-advocating is another really great way to not only be authentic, but also to take back that control when shit happens. Okay. Last, we talked about leading with love. Leading with love, super important, because if you find forgiveness of yourself and forgiveness of others, and right now you might be beating yourself up because, you know, you've got some exams coming, and or you're worried that you don't have the internship yet, and you know what are you going to do when you forgive yourself for not having all those plans. That's okay. Be in the now. When you show up just now, you're not worried about what happened before, because humans are notoriously one of the only species that ruminates on the past. And you stop overthinking about the future, right? Your career, what am I going to do? How am I going to I never, trust me, when I'm sitting back there thinking I was going to be a US diplomat, I didn't have a fallback. And I certainly never anticipated I was going to be, an accidental HR business international person, right? It's okay not to have it all planned. And showing some of that compassion through forgiveness of self is a way to love and to love your life. And when you do that, again, really interesting things will come. Building community. Now, you already are a community. Everybody on this call, right, is a community. Use that network. The network and building relationships and building connections are a key way to not only demonstrate love for the things that you enjoy in your life, but they can lead to some really interesting business outcomes and business opportunities. I would never have joined a fashion, runway business, doing women's, fashion in New York City wasn't not for a business connection. In fact, I've never had to, since moving to the United States, touch wood, I have not have had, I have never had to look for a job. Work comes to me because building relationships through that community. Communication and how you communicate is really critical, and that will also be important as you build your career and also as you go through hard stuff, as you step in the shit, as I say. But stepping in shit is kind of funny, okay? And we all do it. I nearly did it this morning on the dog walk. So, when you can also have a little bit of a laugh and laugh at yourself first, you're going to be able to love yourself and also move through the hardship when you can see the humor of it. I lived through 9/11, not really funny, but there are funny moments. Now, I lived in the massive earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear disaster in Tokyo when I was living there too. Horrible, horrible. And many people lost their lives. In fact, the little small town that I lived in, the first time I lived in Japan, was nearly wiped out. We had to find the humor in those places, and there was a t-shirt that the guy said, I stayed, because all these people left Japan. And we found that to be kind of funny in a Japanese expatriate community kind of way. Love matters, okay? And it will help you through the hard times, not only to take back that control and build your resiliency, but to keep you honest and to keep you authentic to yourself. All right, that's the model in a nutshell. Here's what we've unlocked. Number one, secret. Open your arms. Really interesting work will come to you, I promise. Don't worry if you have a degree in, art, or a degree in history, or degree in anthropology, or whatever the thing is. That is a gateway to getting you to the next thing. And if you open your arms really wide, really interesting things will happen. Number two, shit happens, but shift happens too, okay? When you look at that and take that as a mindset for your life and for your career, everybody has bad days at work, okay? I had a million of them. But when you take that approach, really interesting things can start to happen. And when you use the real model, you can shift and take back control of your life so that you can live a life of well-being and joy. Add color to your career palette. As you can see, I certainly added color all over the place, and I'm not done yet. Writing the book was just my starting point to do the next thing that I'm going to do, and I don't know what that is. I'm in my own transition. I'm 50 years old, trying to figure out what am I going to do, right? But don't be afraid to reinvent yourself. Just because you have a degree in history or a degree in marketing doesn't silo you into being a marketeer for the rest of your life. Heck no. You can do anything, because anything can happen. And I honestly believe that everything is possible. So I'm going to end there. I'm sure it's been information overload. I think we crushed our 40-minute time format, Dr. Bauer. I'm going to come off of the screen here, but before I do, I just want to make sure that all your students and participants, if you want to find more about me, I would love to connect with you. I strongly believe in mentoring, and I'm a certified coach. I love developing the future generation. I would love to hear from you. Find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great resource, y'all. If you're not on there yet, create your profiles, get connected. This is where community starts to drum up. You can follow me on Instagram. You can certainly follow me on my website. I would love to stay connected with all of you. And Dr. Bauer bought my book. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. If you want to see a copy of the book or know how to get that, it is on Amazon, or certainly I would guess that Dr. Bauer would loan it out to you. But I also understand it's the end of the semester, and holy shit, man, like I could never read all the shit that I had to read when I was finishing up. So I bet your leisure reading will come later. But don't ever forget that you always have a resource here in me. I'm here to help perpetuate future generation of purpose-driven people, and to create a well-being culture on the planet for everyone. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Nate. That was wonderful. I have lots of notes that I've taken, but we have one question already in the Q&A here. So I'll go ahead and read that question. I don't know if everybody can see it. And then if you all have more questions, just go ahead. You can put them in the Q&A and we'll see what we get to. So what would you have done differently if you went on to this at your age now with family? So I'll be 45 when I get started in my career and have my family to come along. I still want all of this that you speak of. So how would you maybe change it, given starting on this a little bit later in life?
Oh, Christian, I think that's a great question, and I'm thrilled that you've asked it. There's no stopping you. Age is a number, and I know we hear that all the time, but let me put this in perspective. Time is finite, okay? So the thing to consider, family and experiences, is really about energy. Where do you want to put your energy? Where there is a will, there is a way. We've heard this too, a lot of cliche kind of talking out there. But if you focus and put your energy in the right place, and you do want to do this, then opening your arms in that way to seek these opportunities will enable your family to go along, and or find a way to get your family to go along. And listen, I'll be honest, I didn't always get to live with my family. You know, the COVID years were harsh. And as an out and proud LGBTQ professional, and legally married to my husband, living in a place like Singapore where, you know, marriage equality does not exist, you know, we had to live apart. My husband lived in Thailand for a year, but we figured it out. There is always a way. This is where the reality curve can be very helpful, is if you think that you are experiencing a challenge, then you just have to look for the opportunity and then put the right energy into that action plan, and you can get it. Age is strictly a number. Listen, I went back to Japan when I was 30 something, and I moved to Hong Kong when I was like 37. I turned 43 or whatever it was, 45 in Hong Kong, and then moved to Singapore. So, you can do the things as long as you've put the focus and the energy on those things. And again, an open-armed approach has always been helpful for me.
Thank you. We have a comment from our dean. We're fortunate enough to have our dean, Dr. Dowdy, here this morning with us. No pressure, Nate. No pressure for me either, right? So it was great to start my day in the presence of an encouraging person. I appreciate the reality that's woven into your model of resilience, and will quote you on shift can happen too. So
thank you, Dr. Dowdy. I it's when we think about how we live in an intersectional, adversity-driven world and chaos and distraction. We're fighting for all of this attention credit that's out there today. We can get really caught up in how adversity can shape our lives. But I'm on a one-man mission here myself to really help improve the lives of others by enabling people to get their power back. My mission is building authenticity and resilience in others, wherever they go, however they go. And shift is a big part of that. The faster that you can shift and move, the faster you get through stuff and get on to the next thing. I'm an open book, by the way. So, and Dr. Bauer didn't tell you this, but anything is okay to ask. I'm really here for you. I remember sitting, and I was telling Dr. Bauer a couple of weeks ago. I remember hearing a guy talk who came from Singapore, ironically, and talked about having an international life and expanding horizons, and it was really helpful. So anything open is okay for me.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
I have a lot of notes here, but um, two things that are similar questions. What has been your biggest inspiration? And then also, you talk a lot about learning and adapting. What has been your biggest challenge?
Wow, my biggest inspiration is I'm going to draw on and if you haven't done this, everybody, I encourage you to do it. Is go to the VIA Strengths Finder. I draw a lot on my curiosity, and I draw a lot on my love and thirst of learning. So these are two values for me, in addition to them also being strengths. So where I get inspired is in the types of things that I can do in the world. I'm an accidental HR business person, but in the end, if I connected back to being a diplomat, an international diplomat, that was my target. In many ways, I've achieved that same outcome. It just took a different pathway. And it's because I used my strengths of learning and curiosity and those values of curiosity and authenticity to kind of light my fire in that space. So I would say my inspiration has always been a thirst of learning and seeing the world. And when you start to go out and see the world, there's some. I mean, Dr. Bauer, you just returned from Peru. You know, like I do, that there's a beautiful world out there to go explore. The second question is really about remind me again, which is about accomplishment,
Challenges. So
challenge.
biggest challenge.
I've lived through a lot. I mean, 9/11 was pretty hard. Um, Learning and managing the earthquake, tsunami disaster, and nuclear disaster in Japan was extremely difficult. COVID was really difficult. My family, and if you read the book, they tell you I'm kind of the king of disasters, of natural disasters. So, I mean, I lived through the blackout in New York City, a couple of hurricanes, a massive typhoon in Hong Kong. Um, Adversity and I are kind of friends. So, I don't see biggest challenges. I just see a series of really interesting challenges that if I've been able to go through because I built this model on resilience and it works.
Okay, well, I think it's great, that you do indicate that those challenges are something that maybe, but that certainly provide learning opportunities, but also maybe provide inspiration for the next step. And so
Definitely.
Christian had one more comment. He just wanted to thank you so much. Um, Spent the first 30 years of life in addiction, and so 14 years clean. Congratulations on that. And now purpose and intent are his focus, and we'll connect with you. So just share
Well,
that as well. If
fantastic.
there
Yeah. Awesome.
any other questions that we might have from anybody, we're close on time, but we have a moment for a few more, perhaps. Um,
Say this, there's no right or wrong way. As you can see, when people ask me, they're like, you have a patchwork of a of a career, man. Like how'd you go from, baseball to fashion to toys, to beauty? Um, I went the way I went, and this is the point. There is no right way or wrong way in your life. The way that makes the most sense is the one that makes the most sense for you. And if I can be of any help to anybody, it looks like we're losing people. I know it's an early day for all of you there in the Central Time Zone. Let me know. Connect with me. I'm happy to be a part of your future. And Dan, thank you very much for allowing me to be with you today.
Thank you. I think we have one more question. Sorry.
Well, bring it
Um,
on. Bring it on.
what do you do for self care?
Yeah. So one of the things I do every day, and I know this sounds silly, but I make sure that I manage the dogs in my household. I take that walk. no matter how cold, how rainy, how nasty it is, because I know I have to get out of the house. And I know that when I start walking, and the blood and the movement of the things that are in my body help generate a clarity for myself. I also have a really early bedtime. Not lying about that. I usually go to bed around 9:30, 10 o'clock because I like to get up early in the morning. I also drink 3.5 liters to 4 liters of water every day. These are kind of the bottom, like the bottom line. Those are always the non-negotiables. And that's just a small list, but I try to practice what I preach.
Well, thank you again, Nate. We really appreciate it. I asked a question about your inspiration, and I think that everybody that's attended today will find you to be an inspiration
Okay.
in your experiences. I do. I mean, I'm really happy that you're able to present for us. I learned a tremendous amount. Take notes, and now I need to follow some of these notes. And so to live up to the notes that I've taken. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and we appreciate it. I know it's been a great opportunity for us to hear your story and learn a little bit about everything that you've done. And so thank you, and we'll be in touch. Appreciate it.
Sounds great. Good luck, everybody, with the end of this semester, and have a great day ahead. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Take care. Bye
All right.
bye.
Bye.